You are listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 17. Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell. Today on the show, we welcome Angus Ireland. Angus is the Program Manager, Fibre Advocacy and Eco-Credentials for Australian Wool Innovation Limited based in Sydney, Australia. Angus has considerable experience in raw wool specification and management of wool research and testing operations. He has contributed to the development of automated wool sampling and testing instrumentation. Angus is also closely involved with the operation of the family farm. Welcome, Angus. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Hi, Lisa. Yes, it's a pleasure from my side as well.
Wonderful, and I really appreciate it. It's already end of your day, and you're probably eager to get home. But first, we're gonna dig a little bit deeper in maybe getting to know you. So, I always find your job title very interesting. It's Program Manager, Fibre Advocacy and Eco-Credentials. Tell us maybe a little bit more about your background and the work that you do in the wool industry.
Well, I've been involved in the wool industry for most of my life in one way or another. I was born on a wool growing property in New South Wales, and I studied wool and pastoral science at university. And as you say, most of my working career is focused on wool specification, primarily the development of testing processes and equipment for measuring the important attributes of wool. Over the last 3 years, I've been working for the Woolmark Company in the area of fibre advocacy.
And what are the sort of topics that you're working on?
My work primarily involves commissioning scientific studies to collect evidence about wool's attributes, particularly about the health benefits of wool for consumers and also the environmental credentials of the wool supply chain.
And why especially these topics? What is the reason behind that you focus on these topics?
Well, on the health and wellness side, many consumers are unaware of wool's health benefits. So we support initiatives by universities, hospitals, and other research institutions who want to investigate whether or not the benefits are real and can be proven beyond reasonable doubt in scientific studies. Similarly, with regard to environmental credentials, it's critical to have solid science behind the claims you make about your products.
And then I really love those words, health and wellness, and would like to dig a little bit deeper into that area. What is it exactly that you're focusing on in this area and why?
Well, when you think about it, there's every reason to believe that wool is likely to be healthy for people. After all, nature developed a woolly layer against the skin of sheep and many other mammals over the eons, and this wasn't a fluke. There was a purpose to this. Since the 1920s, there's been many studies of wool's health attributes for things such as thermal insulation and breathability and wool's natural resistance to things like fire, to ultraviolet light, and to odour. Um, More recently, the studies have focused on more general health areas like skin health and sleep health.
And what kind of results do you get from the research that you do in these areas?
Well, the most exciting current research that's underway is in the skin health area. In particular, the recent Australian studies demonstrating that wool helps to improve the skin of people suffering from eczema. You may know, Lisa, that the incidence of eczema has been increasing quite rapidly around the world, and it's now considered to be a global epidemic. In Australia, for example, more than 20% of all children have a clinical level of eczema. Um, and people with eczema essentially have leaky skin that allows moisture to pass through it too freely. And their skin dries out and develops cracks, and bacteria flourish in those cracks. This leads to the redness, the itchiness, and the pain that's symptomatic of eczema. But it's now been shown in two separate studies in Australia that wearing superfine wool garments next to the skin leads to a clinical reduction in these eczema symptoms, and as a consequence, a significant improvement in the quality of the life of people who suffer from eczema.
That's a wonderful outcome of your research. And just another question: would you know why there's a higher percentage of people, or even children, having eczema? Is there a reason for that?
There's there isn't a reason for that. But I think it's largely to do with Western lifestyles and people being removed from nature. Um, that they, in days gone by, they lived on farms and were associated with dirt and bacteria. They had animals and pets in close proximity. All of these aspects of nature are being Western society is pulling us away from those things. People are having cesarean section births rather than natural births, and all of these things limit our contact with bacteria in particular, which can lead to allergy problems.
And then we have to return back to nature and wear wool to solve our skin problems. Sounds
Exactly.
ironic, isn't it? And I've also heard that you did some research in the area of sleep improvement with wool. What can you tell us about that?
Well, there's been quite a long history of sleep research. Once again, going back into the 1900s, showing benefits from sleeping in, on, and under wool. And most recently, we're undertaking a study at Sydney University, a clinical study where people sleeping in three different sets of sleepwear: wool, cotton, and polyester. And we're monitoring all of their sleep characteristics, how rapid is the sleep onset, how much total sleep time do they have, how much deep sleep compared to light sleep. And it will be very interesting to see what this study demonstrates. We won't have the findings from that until the end of this year.
Okay, so then we'll either talk again or we'll just be looking out for those results. Thank you for giving us that little outlook. And these kind of research results, what does it then mean for wool product development and also for the marketing of wool?
Well, with proper marketing, this work on eczema, may lead to a significant increase in demand for superfine wool base layer garments. It does have to be superfine wool. There's a risk that the research will be damaged if incorrect wool is used for these for eczema sufferers, because they have especially sensitive skin, and it's critical that the right type of wool is used. Also, so far, the scientific studies have only been undertaken in Australia, and we're now looking to repeat the studies in other countries to increase the evidence of wool's benefits. And our study is kicking off in the USA right at this moment.
Okay, so you're making sure that the science is really sound and that you have the proof before you can market all these attributes of wool.
Yes, we know it works in Australia in two quite different environments. In Melbourne, which is a cooler location normally. There was a study of babies and children under the age of 3 in Melbourne. And then we undertook a study of adults and adolescents in Brisbane, which is a much more hotter and more humid circumstance. And in both cases, we saw these clinical improvements, significant improvements in the level of their eczema symptoms.
Yeah, I met the other day a lady who also cured her eczema with wool. So there are also already people living, like, who discovered that on their own. But it's great that you also now give those scientific proof as well. And what kind of results, with these kind of results, what do you think are the growth markets for wool going forward? Where do you see potential with for these results?
Well, there is potential, particularly for these base layer garments that are worn against the skin. And as I say, they need to be made from superfine wool, 18.5 microns or less. And there are virtually all the countries that grow wool nowadays are capable of growing superfine wool. But if there is an increase in demand in the short term, the countries that already grow it would be the ones most likely to fill the gap. So that's largely southern hemisphere countries like Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Argentina.
Hmm. And would you see those then products being sold as medical, clothing, or would you see those more as, I don't know, nightwear? What would you see in a consumer market? How can you envision that being sold?
So, as I mentioned, people have differing levels of sensitivity, um, and eczema sufferers are on the more sensitive end of the range. So we are developing this specification that would describe the characteristics of next to skin garments that can be worn by them. And it's not just the mean fiber diameter that's important. It's also things like the thickness and weight of the fabric in the garment that will need to be specified too, because it's known that as the skin heats up, it becomes more sensitive to prickle and itch, and thicker garments are more likely to cause the person to heat up if they exercise, for example. So that area of thermal insulation also needs to be controlled in this specification. And it's likely that the Woolmark Company will develop a swing tag that will go on garments in shopping centres at point of sale to help guide consumer decision making, so that if they do have sensitive skin, they can opt for that swing tag, which indicates a medical level of wool in the garment.
Hmm.
But
Oh, yeah.
but more broadly, there will be continue to be an increase in general base layer garments for all sorts of active wear and outdoor use, and that people with normal skin can wear without the need for such a swing tag.
Hmm. Okay, thanks for explaining that. And another, in your job title, you also have the words eco credentials. And tell us a little bit more about this area of your work.
Well, nowadays, all products need to have strong environmental credentials for consumers to support them. And wool does have strong credentials. Unlike oil-based fibers, wool is a natural fiber that's completely renewable, and it can be grown again every year. It has a light environmental footprint during the use phase when people are washing and wearing their garments, because it doesn't need frequent washing, and it's generally air dried rather than tumble dried. And all of these things reduce the amount of energy used, the amount of water, and also the amount of chemicals like detergents and softeners. Also, at the end of its life, wool is fully biodegradable and essentially returns to the soil as a fertilizer. So, my role with the Woolmark Company is to collect the scientific evidence of wool's environmental footprint and communicate it to the broader LCA community, so that wool's true environmental credentials will be recognised.
And what are the most exciting research results in this area?
Well, the biggest flaw in the way that apparel LCA agencies rate different types of clothing is that they don't count the full environmental footprint from the cradle all the way through to the grave. So, in the case of wool, this means from the farm through all the life stages, including manufacturing, the use phase, then recycling, and ultimately at the end of life, biodegradation back in landfill. Wool's greatest environmental strengths are in these later life stages, use, recycling, and end of life. However, the ratings agencies do not consider these stages in their footprinting tools. They only look at the beginning of the life cycle and stop at the fibre or fabric stages. So the wool industry has therefore been pushing fairly strongly for consideration of the full life cycle. And the good news is that the apparel ratings agencies are starting to listen and are considering extending their footprinting tools beyond the fibre and fabric stages. Until they do this, their ratings will be misleading and may cause consumers to make choices that are in fact more harmful rather than less harmful for the environment.
Yes, and anyone listening who has already listened to episode number 15 with Dr. Beverly Henry might think this sounds familiar, and that's because obviously Angus and Beverly also work closely together. And yeah, everyone who wants to dig deeper into these eco credentials can listen to episode number 15 because that's where we talk a lot about life cycle assessment. Well, before we wrap up, I have one more question, Angus. How can the wool industry members support the work that you are doing? Is there anything how we can make sure these wonderful research results get pushed forward and get distributed at some point in time?
Well, the global wool industry collaborates its activities well through the International Wool Textile Organisation, or IWTO, and IWTO has very active forums in both the areas of health and wellness and also environmental credentials. So really, this is the best pathway for industry members to contribute to these areas.
Okay, so we will link to IWTO website also in our show notes. And just to close up, where can listeners find out more about the work that you do and how can they connect with you?
Well, the best websites, again, would be the IWTO website, but also the Australian wool innovation sites, woolmark.com and wool.com. And I can always be reached through Australian Wool Innovation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Angus, for giving us a glimpse into the work that you do and all that valuable contribution that you do for the wool industry. I really appreciate it. And now you can head on to your evening, hopefully.
Thanks, Lisa. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode with Angus Ireland. If you want to find out more about Angus and his work at the Woolmark Company, visit the show notes at elisabethvandelden.com/017. Once again, visit elisabethvandelden.com/017. Don't want to miss out on any of the future episodes? Then subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Stitcher and also like us on Facebook at Elisabeth Van Delden. Thank you and see you next week.